Ever heard of visceral fat? Well, let's chat about that today. Hey, I'm Mike,
And I'm Twain.
and welcome to another episode of 40 Plus Fit, the podcast where we unpack the science of sustainable weight loss and fitness for those over 40. Today, we're going to talk about something that's dear to my heart since I came back from a bit of a
Hopefully not to. I mean, it's almost quite literally near and dear to your heart. If you think about it.
That's true. Never thought of it that way. Just imagine if we actually planned this kind of talk, I think we would come across as quite competent. But yeah, we're going to talk about this thing called visceral fat. I'm sure you're quite familiar with it from the coaching perspective rather than the personal perspective.
The personal perspective. Yeah. I can't say I've had too much personal experience with it. Mainly just because I've never let myself accumulate that much fat in the first place. But yeah, definitely very familiar with it from the coaching perspective.
Okay, so for me, I have actually I've come to I'm at that age now where fat comes like for free. You you look at the menu and you can feel the fat growing in the midsection. And
It's almost imagine no, not imaginary. What's the term for it? It's almost automatic, right? Like it's like even just breathing in, smelling the nice fragrances in the air helps you to gain some fat for some reason, gain some weight.
that's right. And that's why I have to stay away from hawker stalls. Because when you walk past, you're like, ah, char kway teow, boom, there's a 500 grams there. And char siu, oh, okay, boom, there's another 500 grams. You put on a kilo and you haven't even started eating yet. So, so for
But
me,
but but jokes aside, I mean, like visceral fat definitely is a really important thing to talk about,
hmm.
because it is one of the types of fats, right? That is just terrible for you. You know, it's
So
it's
I think that's a good place to start then. Is probably what's the actual difference between visceral fat, subcutaneous fat, and even let's throw in, animal fat that you're consuming eating. There's a difference between all three. Perhaps you can just give us a bit of
yeah.
insight.
Yeah, well, I mean the main one first, like the animal fat that you consume, that's just a combination of like whatever type of fat it might be saturated. I mean, sorry, if it's animal fat, it's mostly saturated anyway. But it's just external, right? It goes in your gut, and then your body breaks it down into its little constituent parts. It goes in your bloodstream, and then from there, it either gets stored, and then eventually gets used up in some point. So that's not really important for discussion today, per se.
But
We
we
might
just
touch
want
on
to
that
be
when
clear that eating that fat doesn't mean that you're going to get fat from that fat, right? We
yes,
just want
yes,
that
and
distinction each time.
yes. If you listen to our series, by the time you are listening to this, you probably would have heard our series on basic like nutritional building blocks, right? Where we talk about proteins, carbs, and fats, each individual one. There's an episode we did on fats,
Yeah.
and we talked about that there. So definitely go and check that one out, to know more about that. So with that aside, let's talk about the difference between the type of body fat that we carry. So there's visceral and there's subcutaneous. Visceral fat is the fat that's kind of within your abdominal cavity, surrounding and hugging your organs, right? But not in a very pleasant, kind of hug that you want. It's basically around a lot of your important organs like your liver, your pancreas, your intestines. And the subcutaneous fat is just the fat that's under your skin. And so, if you grab like your skin or you grab your belly, okay, and then whatever you can grab there, if you can grab a decent chunk, it's the subcutaneous fat that's on your belly, it's under the skin. When we lose fat, and you start to see more detail in the abs, that means you're losing a lot of this subcutaneous fat. Okay, so that's kind of the difference between the two. Um, so the subcutaneous fat is actually more evenly distributed throughout the body, whereas the visceral fat components, like I mentioned, are more concentrated around the organs in the abdominal cavity. Yeah,
Okay.
that's major difference.
Is it like a body defensive mechanism that it I restricts itself mainly to the midsection?
No, not really. It's actually, think of it this way. I think it's more akin to an overflowing of a bucket than anything else. Because the way fat distribution patterns tend to happen in human beings, there's
Mm.
differences between genders. We might talk about that later, but
Yep.
there's generally the way fat accumulates within beings is from an inside out perspective, right? So we don't actually have that much fat on our extremities, but we have a lot more fat just generally concentrated around the core middle area of our bodies. And then once that fat kind of spills over into an excessive amount, then you start to have a bit more of that spillover effect where it has to get stored somewhere else, right? And it spills over into kind of the internal um area of the body.
I see. And
Yeah.
it's my understanding as well that visceral fat is far more dangerous than subcutaneous fat.
Yes, definitely. And this is the main crux of why we are doing this episode today, because I actually had a couple people talk to me and ask me about the differences and ask me about like why, like how dangerous is it? And first of all, it kind of envelopes the vital organs, right? Again, we are talking about your liver, your pancreas, your intestines, all these things that help with processing of all the foods that you eat and just general daily metabolic function. Your liver is super important for clearing shit out from you. Not literally clearing shit out for you. That's obviously the job of the intestines, but it's it's so funny when we interject both the slang and the technical terms together. But the main thing is this, right? The visceral fat itself, because fats themselves, in the terms of the cells, they actually release various little inflammatory agents. But the visceral fat around your organs actually directly releases it into what we call the portal circulation. So that's the circulatory kind of connections between all these like liver and the intestines and all of that. So it's like kind of direct feeding into these key areas, and that carries blood from the intestines to the liver, and all these substances that are kind of released in there can actually negatively affect the body. So it generally can cause a bit more uh whole body inflammation, meaning it pushes up, let's say, your body's inflammatory response, and it can also kind of lead to a bit more insulin resistance as well.
I see. There's
Yeah.
also a link between visceral fat and cholesterol, right? The LDL cholesterol.
Yeah. Again, it's I think also a side effect or a symptom side effect of this process where it's kind of disruptive to general metabolic function. One of the key things being down-regulating LDL receptor activity in all of these organ sites, right? Where LDL receptors are the things that kind of help you pull and remove LDL from the body.
Mm.
So if it downregulates that activity, it means there's a lot more LDL floating around. And then that's kind of what causes all these increased risks, because if it floats around too long in the blood, it starts to accumulate and cause all those little plaque formations and obstructions.
And what kind of risks, like if you had to just off the top of your head, what are the major ones that we can
Yeah,
likely see
the
from too much visceral fat?
the biggest one is just like heart disease, right? And then if it goes to blood vessels or blood vessels that lead towards the brain, you get stroke. Type 2 diabetes is the general like lifestyle kind of disease that kind of or condition that comes in with just having all this excessive what's the term for this? Excessive impairment of some of these basic metabolic functions.
Hmm.
And I think also there are some potential like higher cancer risks. I'm not too sure exactly which ones. I just know there's some increased risk of specific cancers. Because some of the proteins that the visceral fat itself releases, uh, and these proteins are like all these little I think what's the term for it? It's called adipokines. I'm not so sure how to pronounce it. Maybe adipokines. Yeah. It actually releases all these kind of proteins that can promote tumor growth. And again, that's kind of some of the cancer risks. I believe, let me think about this. Again, somebody can correct me and leave some comments in the Spotify if you are more informed on this, but I believe it's breast cancer, colorectal cancer are two of the big ones. Yeah.
Okay.
Should be those two, I believe.
Whichever they are, they're still cancer. And
Yeah.
cancer,
I mean,
as
nobody
we are
wants.
led to believe, not such a great thing.
Yes,
So,
yes.
so our thing is best is that we try to restrict and try not to get too much visceral fat, I think is the takeaway from this little bit that you've said.
Yeah, for
But
sure. For
but
sure.
does it is visceral fat more something that affects people over the age of 40, or like what leads to it more?
Actually, this is kind of interesting. So, there are some hormonal changes that tends to happen both to men and women. I think women more drastically because of the whole, menopausal issues. But yes, when these hormonal changes kind of happen, the risk of developing, higher deposits of visceral fat tend to go up as well. But these are more of like a function, I would say, of let's say decreased metabolism from just maybe being sedentary as you get older. And of course, later we'll be talking about like some of the ways to so-called combat, this from happening. But yeah, I think as we get older, there's that higher risk of more of these visceral fat deposits. And then between men and women as well, there's actually kind of a difference. And that's a bit more related to the hormonal profile. So, uh, the biggest two are actually estrogen and testosterone, right? Of course, for women they have high estrogen, for men they have high testosterone. So the funny thing is, for men, especially as we are really kind of like subjected to the higher visceral fat risk, just because the testosterone itself tends to be a little bit more fat promoting in terms of the abdominal cavity, believe it or not. So that's one of the kind of like side effects of it in a sense. It's not really a bad thing. It's like it's necessary. There has to be like some fat regulation here and there, but that's just the nature of it. Women, on the other hand, they tend to actually store a lot more subcutaneous fat because of the higher estrogen levels and lower testosterone levels. So, they kind of have it a bit easier in terms of that visceral fat component when they're younger, but then as they go through menopause, the estrogen drops down, they start to transition more to maybe just having a more muted estrogen level or like almost non-existing estrogen level, and then just regular you know, testosterone level, just kind of balancing it out. And yeah, and then eventually you just end up having that risk come in once they age and go past menopause. So as we get older, yeah, there is definitely that higher risk and potential for more visceral fat accumulation. But there's a lot of things that we can do. So I just didn't want to paint this as this huge doom and gloom picture because if you're listening to this and I'm describing all these things, I can imagine how scary it might be to hear that, right? And be like, oh shit, man, is my health gonna go down the
Yeah, I'm
you know
finished.
drain?
Just enjoy the days I have left. But
Yeah.
you mentioned there like testosterone, we're more prone to get this kind of thing rather than the woman with due to the estrogen. So if men were
Yeah.
to elevate their estrogen levels, would that help to combat this at all?
Well, I mean, you might you might combat this part, but then you can bring about a lot of other what they call like aromatizing effects to the body. So that's not what you want. You're just gonna end up with more other issues like maybe enhanced breast tissue and all these other stuff, right? Like that you don't want as a guy. Yeah. So no, even though I want to caution when I say like it does promote that, the effect in which it promotes that is actually not fantastically great. It's a very general thing. And if you're training and you're maintaining muscle mass and all, it's virtually not an issue.
Okay.
Yeah. So when I was talking about all that effects, right,
Mm.
of the differences, the sex differences plus the getting older differences, I was talking from that perspective of somebody that's just letting age take its course without
Yep.
any exercise, is purely sedentary, which most people that are listening to this might have been up to a certain point, right? So yeah, so that's the risk that we're talking about.
Okay.
But if you're already exercising, you're doing weights, you're doing your cardio and stuff, hey, good on you, man. You're already doing a pretty good job. And we'll go into more details later on kind of what are the specifics. Yeah.
Yeah. So when it comes to, just to touch on this one last time before we move on to fitness, um, is there a difference between how men and women actually store visceral fat, or is that quite
Yeah.
similar between the two? Because you said it pretty much wraps around the organs and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
is there any difference between men and women in that regard, or is it really
Yeah.
quite uniform between the two?
Yeah. No, so it's a difference that I mentioned earlier, which is, men are more likely to store fat viscerally just because
Mm,
um of our lower estrogen levels. And then that's why a lot of men have that kind of beer gut. Whereas women tend to store a lot more subcutaneous fat, which is why even though women with like big bellies don't actually have like a beer gut. You know what I mean?
mm.
Like they tend to have like very maybe like
Wide
very
hips.
wide hips and just a lot of belly fat
Mm.
where they can pinch it and they feel, like they can really pinch it. But then you see a lot of guys that have that almost like beer gut-ish belly where they actually can't really pinch that much and it feels very hard.
Yes.
Yeah. So there is a difference in that sense. Guys are just a little bit more susceptible to it. Yeah, but I think also that's like from the women's perspective, the high estrogen is the main driver of this difference. But I also think like largely if you zoom out a little bit, it could just be the fact that because women being the ones that can get pregnant and develop pregnancy and all that, I think there are some evolutionary mechanisms in place to kind of prevent too much of that fat accumulation around the organs. Yeah,
Okay.
it could just be a spatial thing as well. I mean, that's probably just one factor, right? Which is,
Mm.
creating enough space for development of fetus. Um, yeah, so maybe they just don't deposit as much. So these are just things that I'm just throwing out there as I'm not 100% certain on it, but I know the estrogenic effects are as such.
Okay. Well, I think it's time to move on to the part that everybody now, since we've done the fear mongering, let's move on to the part now that everybody wants to hear, and that is now
Yeah.
how can we combat or reduce or reverse the effects of visceral fat now that's built up into the body. So
Yeah.
we'll break this into two aspects. Maybe we can deal with each one individually. But let's start off with fitness. What kind of exercises can we do to help reduce visceral fat?
Yeah. In terms of exercise, I think the first thing to state here is that getting in any sort of exercise, like especially the recommended weekly dosage, right?
Mm,
Which is about 90 minutes to 180 minutes of moderate vigorous exercise. Um, like if you do that, that already reduces, right? Already starts to help you reduce that visceral fat component. There are increasing number of studies that actually link direct visceral fat reduction to exercise. Okay, and then they've done a lot of studies, individual ones plus meta-analysis of various studies all together that seem to support this same conclusions, which is first of all, exercise like directly correlates with reduction in visceral fat components. There's a dose-dependent relationship, which in other words just means more exercise equals more visceral fat reduction. Pretty cool, right?
yeah.
Um, and then there's another finding, which is that compared to just a calorie restriction, that means like if you have somebody that does only a calorie restriction to reduce overall fat versus somebody that does only exercise without a calorie restriction, so they're just eating to maintain the same amount, and then they compare, if you compare to somebody that is doing both calorie restriction and doing exercise, obviously the one that is doing both calorie restriction, getting a deficit, and doing exercise is going to reduce the most amount of visceral fat. Okay, the person that's just doing calorie restriction is going to reduce a decent amount of overall fat, but actually, compared amongst the three groups, it's actually going to be the least amount of visceral fat reduction. And the one doing exercise will actually come in where they actually have a similar to the calorie restrictive protocol, or even more than the one doing a diet. So in other words, to simplify this, it just means that even if you are not dieting, and you want to do something about reducing your visceral fat, go and exercise. And the more exercise you do, the better. Of course, up to the point that you can recover from it, right? Because if
Yeah.
you can't recover from it, you just feel tired and you won't continue doing exercise. But yeah, usually the more, the better, in that sense. So that's the first thing, right?
So when you talk about the more the better,
Mm.
what would you be focusing on then? Is this like if I go and run 40 kilometers that week, is that better than going and doing two strength training sessions? Or do they each play their own parts? Or what would you
Yeah,
recommend? Like, what should we be focusing on when it comes to that particular exercise?
yes. I I think this is the part where you might actually find what the science says really surprising, because look, if you listen to this podcast for any length of time, we are very strong proponents of like strength training, right?
Yeah.
But what the research says is that aerobic exercise is actually really good at helping reduce visceral fat.
Oh,
Yeah. And again, it's almost most of the time you find it in a dose-dependent relationship, which is that more aerobic exercise equals more fat reduction. I'm sure there's a top end limit because everything has its diminishing point,
yep,
right?
yep.
But I think the diminishing point for this tends to be where you cannot recover from it, rather than whether you know you're actually not losing as much visceral fat anymore. So, so that's the first thing. If you are purely worried about the health risks, you have a very big belly and you want to reduce that down, and and you really want like the quickest, most effective thing to do right now, all those things considered, go and start running. Go and start doing more aerobic exercise. I know this runs counter to a lot of things that we say, but that's that's what it is. That's what the science says. So that's probably the best thing to do if you want to get the visceral fat off. But of course, I think we talk about it from a practical perspective, right? Um, the strength training does come in and it actually helps you to maintain like a certain level of metabolism and even enlarge the level of metabolism potentially in the future. And that's really what helps to keep that visceral fat from reaccumulating again. Yeah, so that together with some diet control will help with that. So there is the reduction part, and then there is the phase of maintenance, you know.
Yeah.
And these two things are actually not the same because you probably would do different things depending on your starting point to kind of reduce the amount of fat that you need to do, and then you do a different thing, transition into a maintenance. So I think it's important to make those distinctions when talking about this as well.
Sorry, I've just got thoughts running through my mind, and I'm trying to see how to articulate this out.
Yeah.
It's not coming very easily. So let me just try and spew out some of the things that are going on in my mind.
Yes,
Um,
yes. Just let it flow, man. I
so
think
so
people don't mind.
when it comes to like aerobic exercise, right? It's equated to, like if you're gonna go do a shoot, for bodybuilding.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Generally you want to drop a couple of kilos before you go for the actual, because you want to get to the lowest percentage body fat, to show off the physique that you've built. And the primary mode of exercise that you do at that time is usually you'll hit very high cardio just before the shoot, right? That
Yeah, you
doesn't
hit
take
very
away from
high.
the strength training and everything that you've done, but it's just that is the exercise that facilitates the fastest fat burning in the shortest amount of time. But the problem is, when I look at it, is when you focus too much on that cardio workouts that you have to do to get into that kind of fat burning, uh, it's not a sustainable thing for a long period.
Mm,
And so that's like where you were talking there, is why we are proponents of strength training, is because strength training helps for the long period. It builds muscle mass. The muscle mass then covers so many aspects of health.
yep.
The recent, my TikTok education, I watched a video where an oncologist came on, and she was saying is one of the greatest weapons that you have to fight fight the onset of cancer is actually increasing your muscle mass. Funny enough,
Yes.
I
Yeah.
never even equated the two at all. But if what she's saying is true, that's another benefit that we're getting from increasing muscle mass. So when we're proponents of strength training, it's not because we're a couple of meatheads, but rather that there's so many different benefits that come from strength training. But now bringing that back to today's topic, which is visceral fat. So visceral fat is, if it's, as Twain has established here, is quite a dangerous fat to be carrying around. So
Yeah.
when you think about it, you want to try and take that fat away as quickly as possible, or at least lower it as to the best that you can. As you
Yeah.
said, there might be a limit as to how much, but you want to try and reach that limit as quickly as possible if this is something that's like a ticking time bomb that you're carrying around, right? And so
Yeah,
I
for
can
sure.
understand as like cardio or aerobic activity would probably be your best weapon to try and lower that. So with that in mind, when you're looking at cardio and aerobic activity, what type, like practically speaking, can people now say like, wow, okay, this is crazy. I really need to take down this visceral fat.
Yeah.
What would you recommend that I, after listening to this podcast, I go and do?
Okay, so with regards to that, I would say the best bang for your buck is just looking at your step count. Okay, so track your step count and make sure that you are hitting a certain target that you've set for yourself. Okay, the best thing to do is to just start from where you're at and add maybe 25% on top of that. So if you are maybe at like 5,000 steps, try to add another 1,000, 1,005. Okay. If you are at 7,000 steps, maybe try to go up to 10, something close to that. If you're already at 10,000 steps, you might want to go a bit higher up to, let's say, 12,000 to 13,000, 14,000. Okay. And this will include whether you're going to run, whether you're just moving around for the day, whatever it is. It doesn't really matter. The idea here is that you have a certain level of activity in the day, because that will generally count to some degree as activity related, kind of mediated kind of exercise. So, and in order for most people to hit, so practically, and the reason why I'm suggesting is because practically for most people to hit something like 12K, 13K, you just need to add in a run, like, right? You have no choice. You will have to add in a run,
You
in order
just
to do
need to
that.
add it in, is it?
Yeah, you know what I mean? You probably will need to add in a run. Um, on average, most people can clock about 4,000 steps with 30 minutes of brisk walking. Okay, so easily you could double up your brisk walking speed, right, to a very light jog or even a run, and you could easily clock that same 4,000 steps within maybe 15 minutes. So you think about it from this perspective, if I go and run for 15 minutes a day, that's an extra 4,000 steps I'm getting in, and I make sure I at least maintain my regular day-to-day level of step count. It's only 15 minutes a day, right? And 15 minutes a day just to reduce this health risk and to kind of help with lengthening your life, and not only that, also improving your quality of life. I think it's a really, really, really good, investment to make. Uh yeah. But when you were mentioning also about the the reason why we always talk about strength training and all, I think it's also super important to understand that, like Mike said, the more muscle you have, the more positive benefits you tend to experience on the body. And again, a lot of people will probably point out and say, hey, bodybuilders, they have a ton of muscle, but they're not necessarily the most healthiest and stuff like this. And most people are referring to like pro bodybuilders and stuff, right, who are on drugs to kind of supercharge the levels of muscle that they have that is beyond what the average natural person will be able to attain. Okay, so I would say that's kind of using the wrong example in this case. They're using extreme to illustrate the norm, which is not at all. So don't worry about like gaining tons of muscle, more muscle than will be healthy, because chances are it takes a very concentrated effort for you to be able to reach that stage. So train like you want to gain the most amount of muscle, and then you will get to a level of health where you have a very nice balance of both. And then that will allow you to maintain the results that you're looking for. The the most important thing here is to understand that, and Mike mentioned this just now about sustainability, right? It might not sound very sustainable to do a lot of cardio, but at the same time, it must be understood also that, hey, so there are some phases, especially if you have a lot of excess weight on you that needs to go, especially if it's totally around the belly area. You need to go through a period of taking maybe unsustainable action to quickly get to a point where you can then transition to more sustainability. But the overall sustainability comes from the habits and the actions and the foundations that you put in place, even while you're doing the unsustainable levels of exercise. Yeah, so things ebb and flow, right? So if there's a time in your life where you have this period where you can really focus on yourself, I would say, hey, ramp it up, man. And then just like hammer it home. And then if you start to go into a period of life where, okay, there's a lot more things happening, workloads going up, whatever it is, at least you can reduce that back down a little bit and still continue to make progress. But the idea here is, to learn to play into like the way life just ebbs and flows, and also understand that if I want big change, I need to make big changes as well.
Yeah, so different seasons, right? I
Different
quite,
seasons.
yeah.
Oh wait, I
So
think
so
I think
if
there's one
we're
part.
increasing step count, what else
Yes.
could we be doing?
Uh,
Like you said, now we're in that season. We have the time.
yeah.
What can we focus on in order to
Oh, I
bring us
mean,
down
Yeah.
ASAP.
Get your diet in order because the
Oh,
combination of the exercise.
let's just stay with the exercise for now. We'll jump on to diet after that.
Oh,
But
okay, okay.
so
Talking
so
about
we the first practical thing that you've given is that we must increase the step count. So if it's 5,000, add on 1,000, 2,500, and so on
yeah,
and so on. Just increase whatever it is, 25% more of what you're currently doing. What else can I do? I'm now in a season where I can focus on myself. I have say an hour to 2 hours per day that I can set aside to focus on whatever exercise now to bring down the visceral fat
yeah.
as soon as possible. What else can I be doing? I'm increasing my step count. What else?
Yeah, strength training. Just get back into strength training. Just start lifting some weights. Start if weights are not something that you have at the moment, even body weight stuff is probably pretty good as well.
Okay, what about like you aerobic classes, going for HIIT, going for, whatever that punching one is that they do nowadays, those kind of aerobic classes.
I think those I think those are just fun ways to get in a kind of cardio. They're not actually as efficient as, let's say, doing a proper cardio session. Um, but look, like if somebody's sedentary, that's a great way to kind of just get in the activity and exercise anyway. So
Okay.
that's a good alternative. If you're talking about high
Spinning,
intensity, sorry,
spin class.
yeah, spin class, I guess, would be considered more of like high intensity interval training style, I suppose. But which was the main the next one I was going to talk about. Like if you want to do like high intensity intervals,
Hmm.
that's probably also a good cardio option to consider. But the thing is, a lot of people mistake going for, let's say, like F45 or going for, all these kind of classes where, you're doing some random exercise, then you rest for, a little bit, and then you go and move on to another station or something as interval, like high intensity interval training. It's actually not. Proper high intensity interval training is like you have to really go 100% on an exercise that allows you to actually go 100%. So what I mean by that is like you can do burpees as quickly and fast as you can, but ultimately the nature of the exercise is such that you get limited and restricted by your ability to perform it, because the exercise requires you to move through a certain specific coordinated movement pattern, right? Whereas something like uh, an ergometer on a rowing machine or on a bike, you can really do a full proper interval training, like a high intensity interval training, because on the bike, all you have to do is pedal harder. Okay,
Mm.
now you're just purely limited by your ability to actually pedal harder. Nothing with coordination, nothing with like actual movement. So you can actually push to real proper 100% each time you have to push to 100%. So, the same goes with a rower, like a rowing machine. If you've ever done a rowing challenge before, you know just how intense it can be. So there are all these kind of exercises, which are, again, these are more traditional aerobic exercise anyway, or exercise machines. And these are the machines you want to probably do your interval training on. The classes, the problem with classes, and this is probably just a little, I don't know, a little tangent that I might go on, just bring me back from it. But the problem with classes is that it's a great starting point for people who are just like not active at all, but they're all just based upon like trying to make things fun at the expense of the efficiency. When you're just starting out, it's a good option because anything will work when you're just starting out. But there comes a point where you're not going to get a lot more results because the classes are not great at helping you build your strength, neither are they great at really pushing your cardio. There are some exceptions though, don't get me don't be mistaken, because I think I've seen, like, I have some clients, they go for classes still, they go to BFT or whatever. And sometimes I ask them like, okay, tell me what they do at the BFT. I can tell you which classes you should go for, because some of them, they do orientate the classes a little bit more towards cardio. So they start using a lot of cardio machines. Example, like the ski erg, they use an actual rowing machine. They actually have the air bike, things like this, and then they rotate between those kind of cardio machines. So that has a real proper like cardio effect versus maybe a more varied CrossFit style where you combine some lighter weights and try to do a lot of reps with it or something. Like those are great. They have their own applications as well. But again, for our purposes right now, we're talking about effective cardio exercise to do, especially if you want them to be time efficient, and you're going to take 45 minutes to an hour to go and do extra work. Like, why would you waste it on something that's middle of the road when you can use the correct tool for the job? So like you do exercise and weights and that kind of exercise for proper to get the proper muscular development that you're looking for, the strength development that you're looking for, and then you go and do, a proper like cardio workout, either a moderate intensity run, where you're trying to hit a certain pacing, or you do the cardio intervals I just mentioned. All these things at least will give you the desired effects. So for me, I think where I always come from with my prescriptions in this sense is always from the perspective of like what is the best tool to use for the job you're looking for. Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's my little tangent on classes and stuff. Um, yeah, but whatever you can do, to be honest, if you can go and do that, and that's something that keeps you going, at least to get you into the habit of going for exercise, that still beats just sitting around and just wishing that you did more exercise.
I think I was just going to mention something along that line where I was going to say is I suppose it's actually, as a coach, it's also very difficult to say, like when I'm asking for questions as what is the practical thing I can go and do right now? It's very difficult to
Oh,
say because you have the experience of dealing with people from all different walks of life, all different seasons, all different stages.
yeah,
So it all depends on where you are. What is your activity level? What is your diet like? What is this like? So there's too many factors that come into play to confidently say, okay, this is what you must go and do.
yeah.
Um, Whereas the advice that you gave originally is to increase your step count and increase it also by doing something uh, with a bit more moderate activity, as in you say, like going for a run or going for a faster run, given a bit more high intensity, and then
Mm.
coupling that with some strength training so that you can also benefit in the long term. I think that's the more generalized and I don't want to say safe advice, but I
Yeah,
think
you,
that's
you you
probably
can't,
the I mean it applies to a lot of us already
yeah.
if we
So
can
you
all
can't go
just
too wrong.
yeah.
Can't go too wrong with it.
Okay. So if we get our step counts up and all that kind of stuff, we're getting a bit of high intensity workouts here and there, and we're
Yeah.
starting to get a bit how shall we say uh consistent with our strength training. What can we do with regards to say maybe diet and lifestyle to
Hmm.
facilitate the visceral fat burning even more?
I think the biggest thing for diet would be the biggest thing for diet would really be um or actually there are two things that I can think of. Okay, the first one would be yes, making sure that you're eating a well-balanced kind of diet. Okay, what does that mean? Essentially means are you getting enough protein in, to help your body kind of repair, recover itself and maintains muscle mass. And then also, are you eating an amount of calories that on average allows you to um uh reduce your overall weight, right? Like, are you in a calorie deficit? So that one's pretty important. Uh, but then the other part also, I think, in terms from a lifestyle perspective, is actually alcohol. And this one is one thing I notice with a lot of people that actually have like kind of higher visceral fat counts, even though weight-wise they might not necessarily be largely overweight. Okay, and I think a lot of people also often hear this they get this like diagnosis right from the doctor where they're told, oh, you have non-alcoholic fatty liver and stuff like this, which kind of also is a visceral fat kind of diagnosis in that sense. But yeah, the reason why I talk about alcohol is because alcohol itself kind of impairs the liver's ability to like metabolize fat. And so you're kind of just it promotes more visceral fat accumulation in that sense. So this one's a little bit more direct towards the visceral fat itself. If you do have a large amount of visceral fat, then just getting rid of your alcohol intake would probably be one of the biggest things you can do. I think that's all. I mean, if you think about it, also that's kind of what I call a beer gut. Maybe that's kind of where it comes. Yeah,
I mean, it had to come from somewhere, right?
they had to come from somewhere. Where they noticed people that were drinking lots and lots of beer ended up with this huge belly. Of course, I'm sure the beer itself, adds tons of calories as well because it's easy to drink a ton of beer. Well, I mean, for people who really enjoy beer, I suppose it's easy to drink a lot of beer.
Yeah.
And then, with like 1 pint, right? How you're taking in easily what, 500 calories or something, you know? So you just have somebody drinking 2 or 3 pints. I have friends who can, consume like 5 pints in a sitting with just chatting around. That's easily now 2,005, 3,000 calories going to their system. And the thing is like the calories that are going in, yes, they have energy. Your body technically metabolizes them and gets some energy out of them, but the corresponding stress to your system that your body's undergoing is just so immense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, alcohol, but when you're looking at food itself, is visceral fat also basically just um an outcome for too much calories in and too little calories out?
Yeah,
Or
it generally tends to be um it generally tends to be more to do with that. Obviously, look, like the quality of food that you take in, I think a lot of the stuff that we would recommend for, let's say, somebody with higher cholesterol would probably apply here. Similarly, but those are also just generally good advice, which is number one, make sure you're getting enough fiber in. This one is one of the most important things. So that means more fruits, more vegetables. You can supplement a fiber supplement if it makes it easier. And then the other one is like we talked about already, protein, right? You need to get in enough protein to make sure the body has the requisite materials to repair, recover itself, right? And make sure it continues to maintain its organs, the tissues and the muscle tissues and all. So these two are the two, like probably the two most important things. In terms of, let's say, like fat intake, same thing would apply. We might want to go with like higher, healthier fats, more of the polyunsaturated fats. You're talking all the avocado oils, nuts, seeds, kind of fats, fatty fish, kind of fats as well. Less of the more traditional animal fats like bacon, pork kind of stuff, right?
what?
So a bit less, I mean, a bit less of those. And yeah, I think for the purposes of visceral fat, it really does ultimately still come down, like quality is great, but it ultimately does come down to like how much fat are you carrying on your body. And so the thing is, if you enter into a calorie deficit, you're already going to be dictating that fat loss happening, right? So if you are burning off more than you're taking in, you're going to initiate that fat loss in the body just because there's the energy difference. Now, where does it pull a lot of that fat out from? What kind of comes down? We can then alter that a bit more specifically with the exercise. So this combination is a very powerful combination in that sense.
See.
Yeah.
If you're looking at food specifically, is
Yeah.
there any like types of food that's more beneficial in this kind of thing? Like when you talk about upping your fiber, you can take a fiber supplement, you can all this.
Yeah.
When you talk to your clients, do you mention more like any specific kind of food that is easier to get your fiber in?
Yeah. Like generally what I give them a list, to be honest. I give them a
Okay.
list. Hey, if you guys want a list, might as well shout this out here. So if you want a list, just drop me a message. Drop a comment, right? Drop a like and a comment on this podcast episode. Yeah, gotta make you work for it, right?
Yeah.
But if you want a list, just drop a message there and then send it over. Basically, it's a list of like the lowest calorie fruits that you could take that also has a decent amount of fiber, and then there's a fiber list as well that I give them, based with a whole bunch of different foods that are ranked in order of like most fiber to least amount of fiber and calorie control and whatever. But in general, I would recommend taking a lot more like legumes, so a lot more beans, things of that nature. Lentils are a great one as well. Of course, how you cook them is important. So, if they're slathered and fried up in oil and all that sort of stuff, it's going to add to the calories. But if you have them in like a stew where, you just, or even like a chili where you put in the tomato, right? Like a large part of the base is tomato.
Mm.
Yeah, even that kind of mix is also pretty good. So that's great for, tons of fiber. Peas are actually another really good one. Corn as well, surprisingly. It's also a great one. And then of course any of the leafy greens that you can get. especially the dark leafy ones, because they have some added benefits, extra iron, extra vitamin B, stuff like this, that can facilitate a little bit more of the fat metabolization. Again, these are just like really 1% differences. So the major difference is still, hey, are you getting in enough fiber in the first place, and are you eating in a deficit? If you're not eating in a deficit in the first place, you're not going to lose weight. You're not going to your body's not going to be convinced to remove the fat at a big enough rate. Yeah. Yeah, so that's kind of what I would suggest if you're talking about from that perspective.
Okay. And then finally, if we look at the lifestyle, what about how does the sleep play into all of this?
Ah, that's actually a interesting one as well. I think sleep itself, first thing is that without proper sleep, the studies are quite clear on that, where let's say if you're losing weight, a larger proportion of that weight will come from lean tissues. So it could be maybe losing some muscle, it could be water as well. And less of it will come from fat. So if you don't get enough sleep, you might lose a bit more muscle, you might not lose as much fat as you can, essentially. So get more sleep, and the cutoff is I think 7 hours to 9 hours was the one control group. The other control group was below 5 hours, I think.
Oh,
Yeah. So they were like five to six or something of that nature. I have to go and check the study again, but that was the difference, you know. And the difference also was significant, meaning the group, so they were both calorie controlled. This was a good part about the study. They were both calorie controlled in terms of the amount of calories that they took in. And then one group was sleeping, I think 5 to 6 hours, or maybe even less than 5 hours. I can't remember exactly. The other group was 7 to 9 hours. And so the 7 to 9 hour group, while they both lost the same amount of weight within the duration of the study, the 7 to 9 hour group lost I forgot, was it 76% or so from fat? Okay. And the other group was less than half of what they lost, what the other group lost. So
wow.
out of the total amount of weight loss, I think was 20 something to 30%.
So the rest all came from muscle mass.
Yeah, probably some muscle, also some water and stuff,
Wow.
It's not always like purely muscle. Yeah.
So this is this is my takeaway from here is that I have to go back and tell the wife that I need to sleep more.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a whole other conversation we can have about, I think, just how, I guess, how society and technology has kind of changed us and engaged us and made us feel a bit more like we are always missing out. There's like FOMO and everything. And there's this whole thing called like revenge bedtime procrastination, where people stay up to win back a bit of their day to feel like they're in
Yeah.
control.
Guilty.
It happens. It happened to me as well. Like
Mm.
sometimes I'm just like, I should be sleeping, but why am I still reading this thing? And why am I still watching this video?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I'm sure many people listening to this also can can relate.
Yeah. I blame the K-drama people when you get caught up. All right. I think that pretty much covers it. We spoke about what visceral fat is. We spoke about
Mm,
what's the detriments and the dangers of having visceral fat. And then we moved on to what can actually be done by it. We said that you can increase your step count. Um, Also added to that is try to increase your intensity of some of those steps daily, and then not forgetting the consistency of the strength training for the
yep.
long term. And then with that, we also want to make sure that we are cutting down our alcohol intake. We want to ensure that we still eating within a caloric deficit so that we can create the environment for the fat loss, as well as increasing our fiber and making sure we're taking in our protein for recovery. I think that covers pretty much everything.
Yes, that pretty much covers it. Oh, wait. I think last thing that I want to leave people with, that will be really useful and this is something you can use as a guide to kind of help you figure out whether or not you should really double down into doing a lot of cardio first and really focus on bringing down possibly the visceral fat component. Is that assessing your risk of like how much visceral fat could you possibly have? Okay. And the easiest way to do this, honestly, is just to measure the waist height ratio. So I think doctors, when they do screenings, they actually do this thing called a waist hip ratio as well. Like you probably will see that on your health checkup and stuff. But it's actually a more I would say uh accurate or more reliable correlated way to test that. It's the waist to your height. And so just take your waist measure, basically cutting across the belly button. So tense up your stomach, cut across the belly, then you take a tape measure and cut it across the belly button. And then you pull it, nice and snug so that you get a good reading of your waist. And then you take that and you divide that by, of course, the same unit, right? So let's say you take that in cm, you divide by your height in cm, and then you get a ratio. And that ratio, if it's more than 0.5, yes, I would say number one, make sure you focus on your diet to get the calorie deficit going. And then the type of exercise you want to prioritize is really doing as much aerobic work as you can. Again, getting that step count in. Right, start from there and just hammer that home until your waist starts to come down further, which also will be accompanied likely by a lot of weight loss as well. Because if you think about it, the bigger your stomach compared to your height, the chances are that you'll be pretty overweight. So it's more of a correlationary thing. And so that's where you want to start with. So 0.5 and above, definitely start with that. If you're between 0.45 to 0.5, then I would say you probably can get away with, I wouldn't say can get away, but like you probably want to focus on both the cardio component and some sort of strength training. If you had to pick between one or the other, I would suggest strength training because at that stage, as long as you have your diet in order and you do your strength training, you probably will already experience a decent amount of that overall fat reduction, which will likely pull down the visceral fat as well.
That's a great point that you brought on there, the waist one. I think mine is slightly above 0.5. So yeah,
Sorry, what? I didn't hear you. What did you say?
I think I have some work to do.
That was Mike's takeaway. And hopefully the same takeaway for some of you as well.
Remember, if you want to get that cheat sheet from Twain, you need to like and drop a comment in this episode of this Spotify episode.
Yeah.
And we'll get that cheat sheet through to you.
Yep.
As always, thanks, Twain.
Yeah, thanks, man. If you all want to reach out, as always, just drop by the website. So the website is fitforlife.io. That's if you want to reach out to me. We also have our 40 Plus Fit website as well. So the 40 Plus Fit website has tons of other articles and stuff that kind of cover what we've been talking about on the podcast. So you can use that as a reference point as well. What's the website again, Mike?
40plusfit.com. FORTY plus PLUS.com.
Okay.
Yeah. Awesome. Then we'll catch you all in the next one.
Thanks so much, Mike.
All right. See
You
ya.
guys.